Some of the people watching this video might be aware of the story of Jonah. You know, the guy who was swallowed by a big fish. If you don't know the story of Jonah, perhaps you should look it up, because we have the Bible reenacting itself in reverse here with the death of Salwan Momika, except for one thing. The people of Nineveh listened to Jonah and let him live. The people of Sweden did not. I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. It just struck me as an incredible irony that somebody from Nineveh came to us here in the West and started preaching a message of death and destruction if we didn't mend our ways. And he ended up getting killed. Whereas when Jonah went to Nineveh from what would have been the West at the time, they listened to him and repented. Now, I just thought you might be interested in where Nineveh was. So let's get a little map up, should we? Okay, this is the Middle East. That's where Israel is now. Here we have what's called the Fertile Crescent. This area, and remember, we're talking about, well, between about 5,000 and 1000 BC or something like that. There was a lot more rainfall at that time in this area. And here is Nineveh on the Tigris. It was at the centre of a lot of trade routes going to the coast here, coming from India and Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the prime source of lapis lazuli, by the way, a blue-coloured stone, which was much used in making long-lasting blue paints. It was used in Egypt, of course, and ultimately in the Middle Ages, it was used powdered for painting icons. It was called ultramarine, of course, because it came from over the sea, but it came from a lot further than that. It came from over here. Anyway, that's another digression, isn't it? This is Nineveh here on the Tigris River, well watered. The area around it was an area which was very fertile, so you could have a big town and feed the people feed the non-agricultural people in the town. So it became famous for its bronze work and silver work and that sort of thing. And you can only have that sort of thing going on at that level of sophistication if you have a good food supply. And Jonah came from this area and went over here and preached to the people of Nineveh. And Nineveh became a sort of byword for wealthy decadence at the time of Jonah. And he went there to tell people, you may be wealthy, but stop being decadent. And for some reason, they listened to him. And Jonah got away with it. He spent some time inside a big fish, apparently, because he took ship from here, I don't know where to, Aleppo probably, or somewhere around here. And somewhere along the line, he was swallowed by a fish and then beached somewhere. I'm not quite sure of where he was beached. But there, he was out of the fish. It's often said to be a whale. It never says a whale in the Bible. It just says a big fish. But whatever, the idea was that we have a centre of culture here, which is rich and decadent, and they listened to the message of somebody who was telling them to not be decadent and to be aware that God was watching them. This has actually nothing to do with the Jewish religion. It was just a message Jonah was bringing about don't let your so-called civilization run away with you. And it turns out that Salwan Momika was from this area. He was born in Mosul, apparently, quite close to Mosul actually, which is very close to Nineveh. So he belongs to a people of very ancient lineage. People have been there thousands, 10,000 years, with a recognisable culture and civilization. And he was a Christian as well, which means that he hadn't probably had that much admixture with the invading Arab culture that displaced all of the Assyrian culture quite horrifically after in the 7th century, the 8th century. Okay, so now you know something about where your civilization, your Western civilization, started from. One of its birthplaces, one of its cultural antecedents. And if you look Nineveh up on, in the online, if you look anything about Nineveh, you will see the most beautiful and sophisticated of artifacts and cultural remnants. All right, let's get back to the main story. So there's the story in the Bible of Jonah trying to get away from God because God said, you've got to go to Nineveh and you've got to tell them. And he was afraid of what the people of Nineveh would do to him. So again, it's sort of ironic that what happened was somebody came from Nineveh with a similar message in return. And the Swedish government sort of allowed him to be killed. Maybe not by Swedes, ethnic Swedes anyway. So, but what do they say about Salwan Momika when they're reporting the news? Salwan Momika assassinated in Sweden after Koran burnings. So I went to look up Salwan Momika, and this is the news I got from him. Man who staged Koran burnings in Sweden shot. New York Times, man behind Koran burnings, NDTV, the Koran burner. Let's see what else from the news sources. India, killed for burning the Koran. The Hindu carried out several Koran burnings. And if you look at the rest of the references to him, all it is that Salwan Momika burnt the Koran. That's all he ever did in his entire life, according to all of these news reports. He has no other reality than that he burnt the Koran. Well, he did a lot more than that, of course. But that's how he's identified, and the general picture we're getting thereby is that he was asking for it. Not Salwan Momika, the anti-Muslim, or rather, the anti-Islam activist, but the man who burnt the Koran. Not Salwan Momika, who had to run from his hometown because of Muslim persecution. No, he's the man who burnt the Koran. Not Salwan Momika, who was trying to bring a message to the West. No, he was the man who burnt the Koran, even on things like Business Standard. That's all he was. And the general message, as I said, is that because he did that, well, what can you expect? Well, what you can expect is that a place like Sweden, or even I think he was thrown out of Norway because they refused to protect him. And I believe what he wanted to do was go to America because Sweden was not protecting him. And as you see, he was right. And here we have the Independent, of course. And just look how the Independent puts it. The Independent. Just look at this. Iraqi man, Salwan Momika, who carried out several Koran burnings in Sweden, has died. Now, he wasn't an Iraqi man. He was a particular sort of Iraqi. He was a Christian Iraqi. He was an Assyrian Iraqi. That face there is the result of thousands of years of culture. Because if he's not an Arab, which he is not, his lineage comes from a time we can't even begin to excavate. Just remember that face. That is an ancient face from a time when people in Nineveh were worshipping Isis and beyond. And Sweden allowed that face to be broken. But there is something else that we have to remember. If you look at Momika's history, you will see that he was an Iraqi Assyrian Aramaean, a refugee in Sweden, and an anti-Islam activist. He was killed, obviously, by Muslim activists. But this story is older than that, isn't it? He is a remnant of a culture that pre-existed Islam by thousands of years, and was pushed into a corner of Iraq by Islam. He is one of the fight back people from that culture. But what was going on? The battle of the Aramaean Assyrians against the invading Arabs was being played out on the streets of Sweden. What we have here is an existential battle between two groups of people in the Middle East who've been fighting each other for at least 1400 years. And now they're fighting each other on the streets of Sweden, and Sweden is in Europe. On the streets of Europe, these battles are going on. And in Britain, for instance, on the streets of Leicester, there are now running battles, or there have been running battles between Muslims and Hindus, and also an ancient fight. And they're going on in Europe. And nobody is talking about this. Well, nobody in the elite is talking about it. Instead, we just get all of this on Google, the man who burnt the Koran. That's all it has boiled down to. No, it's not the man who burnt the Koran. It's the man who was continuing a Middle Eastern fight into Sweden in many ways. And the Middle Eastern fight is fighting back against him. But he's also the man who was bringing a message to the West about what happened in Nineveh. And all it is the man who burnt the Koran in all of the news. don't get diverted. Those burning pages are just a symbol of what Islamism is going to do to all our books if we don't acknowledge it. All right, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.